Welcome back. That over there is where the host would have been kept, the sacred bread and wine of the Mass. The tradition has it that King Henry was murdered here, but evidence of the time of the medieval period when he was here at the Tower as a prisoner says that this area of the Tower was not being used for prisoners at that time. So it's not a dead cert that he wasn't killed there, because this is a royal private chapel, so there is that, and he was a very religious man, very religious. So yeah, he could well have been here praying, and that may be how he died. A lot of the Tower traditions unfortunately were cooked up by the Victorians in the Victorian era. When the Victorians discovered that this was such a big tourist attraction, it was like the Disney World of its day. Don't forget, it still had a menagerie before the Duke of Wellington got rid of it, and that had a lot of things, just the crown jewels and everything. The Victorians made up a lot of the Tower traditions. Some areas of the Tower they rebuilt in a very Gothic medieval look to try and make it look how they thought was more authentic. And some people do call it, historians do call it, the Victorian Disney World. So, yeah. Into our next area, which takes us up here. And outside, I believe. Get some nice views. Yes, it takes you outside. You get views of the river and of the White Tower, which is the oldest part of the Tower of London. Of course, that you don't get more London-esque than Tower Bridge, do you? Oh, the mist is clearing now. I took a nice moody atmospheric picture earlier of the Shard all in mist. So yeah, the medieval palace, which we captured all the history of that anyway. So, but this is the White Tower here. This is the oldest part to the Tower of London. This is William the Conqueror's White Tower. When they first came along the Normans, there would have been a motte and bailey here, which is like a raised hill with a wooden fortification on it. And then they started the building of this little beauty as soon as he knew he was on the throne and here to stay. It was mostly finished off in the reign of his son, William Rufus. William Ruface is William Redface, which intimates that that king may have suffered from high blood pressure or been fond of his drink. Both are possibilities. To be a Norman, and to be a Norman knight and a Norman king, meant to chuck your weight around. And to be a peasant, a serf, or a servant, or a servitor, meant to be on the receiving end of that. There you go, the Shard, HMS Belfast below it there. Not a bad view, is it, eh? I like that, on the top of the Shard, all in mist. It's quite busy at the tower. It always is busy at the Tower. It's such a popular place. Oh look, and we can see, just walking along there, one of the reenactors, and I think that one's King Henry V. Here he comes. Snap. There's a lot of reenactors. They do it for the kids. So unfortunately you can't always get right up close to them because it's packed full of kids, and you know my rule on trying not to film children without their consent. It is difficult in a place like this, but every beggar films here, so it's kind of a free-for-all really of filming. gosh, it's so pretty. The cheese grater. Ugly things, some of these modern buildings, but some of you may like. I do like the juxtaposition of old against new. I must admit, I like that. That's what I like about London and things like this. That I mean, the Victorians, they didn't give a fig for history. They pulled down medieval buildings, all sorts. Dick Whittington's old house, Sir Walter Raleigh's house, all sorts. They pulled down churches. They didn't, and there was no English heritage to protect these things back then. So yeah, places like this the Victorians liked because they liked Gothic and they liked medieval and they liked blood and gore. And the Lanthorn Tower, this is one of the things that they rebuilt. To us, this looks perfectly medieval, and it was built in a perfectly medieval way, but it isn't medieval. This is the Lanthorn Tower. It was built from 1220 to 1238, demolished in 1777 and then rebuilt in the 19th century. And a lot of very credited historians say that it's in this location that King Henry VI was murdered, and that he was imprisoned here rather than in the royal apartments. But I don't know. It's one of them things we're never going to know. But where we were in the chapel just now at the Royal Chapel, every year on, I think his anniversary date when he died was the 21st of May, forgive me if I'm wrong, but on the day that he died, every year something occurs. Called the ceremony of the roses and the lilies. And it's basically a little private ceremony every year, involves certain colleges and things like that, and they make their way from a service in the Chapel of St John, which is in the White Tower here, to the place where Henry is said to have been murdered, and then a little service is done, and it's done every year to remember King Henry because he was murdered. When King Edward and Richard III, Edward's brother, and George, Duke of Clarence, this is the Wars of the Roses, the Plantagenets, and you had York against Lancaster, and my God, they were an absolutely ruthless bunch. And Henry was captured. He'd been king, overthrown, then king again, then overthrown again. But on the second time he was overthrown, Edward and whatnot decided that he had to go. And go he did. They put out that he died of sheer melancholy after finding out that his son had been killed. I think it was at the Battle of Taunton, I could be wrong with that one, that his only son and heir had been killed. And some say because his wife, Margaret of Anjou, known as the she-wolf of France, no one liked her. She was apparently a ruthlessly evil woman. And some say that the heir to Henry VI wasn't even his son, that she'd got herself pregnant by some other person and passed the boy off as the king's son. Because Henry was mad for quite some time, and yeah, all Red Queen, White Queen and all that type of business. But yeah, and Henry was killed somewhere in the tower. When he was killed, they put out that he died of sheer melancholy, and they must have killed him in such a way that it didn't show too badly, because his body was put on display. I mean, it was taken to Old St Paul's and laid on a bier, which is like a thing to convey bodies, and under a hearse. A hearse in those days wasn't a carriage or a car that takes the coffin to the funeral. A hearse was like a framed structure built to look like a chapel or church, and it was full of candles and craped with black velvet and drapes, and that was put over the coffin so people could see Henry. Yeah, and then he was taken to, I think it was Chertsey Abbey after that, and he was buried there. But later on, the next king, feeling guilty, apparently, moved King Henry. And when the body was taken out of its original grave and moved, they say that there was blood and matted hair found on the back of the scalp. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But yeah, some say that he was bludgeoned on the back of the head while at prayer, and some say that Richard III stabbed him on the orders of his brother. Whether that's true or not, we do not know. So, join me for the next part.